back then, you didn't see a lot of women in sales or CEO or higher, C-suite. It was a challenge for myself. So I kind of said, okay, this is either like a growth opportunity or this is kind of like a sign for me to get out and do something else. But the longer I stayed at the company and in the industry, like the more I learned about like, hey, we've got something here.
Hi, and welcome to the Solar for All show. I'm your host, Jeff Greenfield, and this is the show where we focus on the intersection of clean energy and issues of race, class, justice, and equity. We're excited to launch this and promote it. We want everyone to follow us on all the socials and then go to the show notes for anything that we talk about today, solarforall.show. That's www.solarforall.show. And without further ado, I'm going to get into it with our guest today, Ruby Quintana. And actually, let's see, I've got all sorts of names for you. Ruby Quintana Carbajal. And then you just gave me a couple more names. I know some folks from South America have, about 9 or 10 names. You've, I think, only got 4. But we'll get to that. Ruby lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and right now, and for the past 4 years, is the director of vendor engagement at the Amicus Solar Cooperative, where I first met her. Actually, I think I met you before that when you were working for Kyocera Solar. She worked for Kyocera for 14 years. So all in all, she's been in the solar industry for about 18 years, and that's a long time in solar years. She's seen a lot of things happen from a variety of perspectives. She originally studied psychology at Phoenix College and was born in Mexico and is a permanent U.S. resident, has a lovely daughter, and is a lot of fun to hang out with at the Amicus meetings and on Amicus calls, and does lots of good work for us. But today, I want to learn more about her experience in the solar industry and perspectives on these topics that we're taking on at this podcast. What's going on, Ruby?
Yeah. So actually, my name depends on who you ask. But if you were to ask my Mexican grandmother, it's Ruby Cristina Quintana Ramirez de Carbajal, because I'm married. Quintana is actually my maiden name. But as you stated, I started in solar back in 2003. So everyone knows me as Ruby Q or, Quintana. So that kind of just stuck. It's easier. But Facebook, LinkedIn, that has, Carbajal in there, my husband's last name, my married woman name. So, yeah. And then, I have 3 beautiful daughters that are my pride and joy. They are 13, now 13, I have a teenager. And then the other 2 also have summer birthdays, and they'll be 7 and 5. So my baby will be starting kindergarten. And like you said, I started at Kyocera. My journey in solar began as a temporary job. So I thought, right? Fresh out of college, I majored in psychology. I did go to the community college here, and I did a transfer program with ASU, the university. But obviously, didn't have a scholarship and didn't want to have that financial burden on my parents. So I said, hey, let me do community college as long as I can. I worked 3 jobs and I was a full-time student going through school. So I figured, what is an interesting, career path or subject that I'm passionate about that would be easy for me, right? So that I don't flunk out and, waste all this money. So I chose psychology and I loved it. And I feel like that definitely has helped me understand not just myself and my family, but people in general. So I think that psychology and then going into sales was super helpful, right? Just understanding people and learning how to work with and communicate differently with different people. So, so I started there, like I said, in 2003, customer service, my temporary job. And then, after being there for a few years, there was an opportunity to go into sales. And Kyocera was a very conservative, Japanese company, very, very much Japanese culture in the early days, right? So number one, being a woman in solar in 2003 was way different than it is today. We're still significant, we're outnumbered, right? But back then, you didn't see a lot of women in sales or CEO or higher, C-suite or other positions, right? So it was a challenge for myself, right? So I kind of said, okay, this is either like a growth opportunity or like this is kind of like a sign for me to get out and do something else with my life. But the longer I stayed at the company and in the industry, like the more I learned about like, hey, we've got something here. Like I definitely want to make this world a better place for, our future generations. There were no women on our sales team at the time. And I took the challenge, right? So I said, you know what? I'm going to go for it. There were 2 job openings, either customer service manager or sales. So I was single. I was ready for a change. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for sales. And I will say that it was challenging for me on many levels, right? Number one, of course, we had those people that thought that maybe, it was going to be too hard for me to get rejected or, the fear to fail or that my emotions would get in the way, right? Because I was a woman, right? Or female. So when someone throws something like that at me, it makes me work towards it even harder, right? Part of it to prove them wrong, but mostly to prove to myself that it's something that I can do. And it's very much like, I'll show you type of thing, right? So yeah, I took it and I met so many great people. And I had incredible mentors on the way too, people that are well known in the industry, not just at Kyocera, right? Tom Dyer, which was our VP of sales, and he did a lot of policy work at the time, well known in SIA and other organizations. And he was like, you can do this and I'm going to help you and I'm going to, guide you. And if you ever need anything, anyone messes with you, you come to me and I've got your back. And I had that from a lot of different folks. So it was wonderful to have that and see those small changes in the industry, right? And showing other women in the organization that like, hey, an admin role isn't just the only thing that you could do, or a role in accounting isn't the only thing that you can do. We can all do more and we're capable of it, right? So that was really cool. And then after that, so, I got married and had my beautiful firstborn and decided, sales is wonderful, but there's a lot of travel involved and a lot of, doing this and that. And so I kind of didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to spend more time at home with my baby, with my husband, my family, right? So I was like, okay, maybe this is the time for me to say, okay, this is where it ends. Like, it's time for me to do something else. And so I actually put in a 2 weeks notice. And I said, I want to spend more time at home. And I know that this job requires a lot more. So I don't want to, I want to give you guys the opportunity to find someone else to take my place. And I'll stay as long as you need me to, right? But this is just not the job for me anymore. And they actually said, well, what do you want to do? Whatever it takes to keep you here. Like, tell us what you think the company needs and what we can do to support you in this new role. It's hard enough, right? Trying to be a mom, right? But then also to successfully run your business, which a sales manager is basically running your own business, right? Within a territory or whatever. You want to make sure that you attend to your customers, but also keep that home life balance. It's extremely, extremely difficult, right? And so I just kept thinking at the back of my head, like, oh no, are they going to start saying, I told you so, this is too much for someone to for a woman to take on. And I actually faced that when I went on maternity leave. I left everything in order, getting ready to come back. And I actually had a manager of mine visit accounts to tell them, like, she's not coming back. And they would call me on my personal line, like, we just heard, so-and-so was here visiting us today and said you weren't coming back to work. Is that true? Who's going to be our new sales manager? And kind of like this panic. I was like, what is happening? No.
Huh.
I'm coming back.
Wow.
So yeah, which I mean, if and we've had it before, right? Where someone's wife had a child and there were no rumors of that person not coming back to work, right? Or if they wanted to take a week off for paternity leave, there weren't, oh, is he not going to be able to fulfill his job role anymore or handle the load with it? So I was experiencing all of these things at the same time, but there were other people in the organization that were extremely supportive, right? The ones that said, what do you want to do? How can we make this a better work environment? Like, what do we need? And how do you think you can help us? Like, let's grow together. So, so then we started a new department in the company, inside sales, and I ran that, and I got to hire people very green, right? Fresh out of college or fresh out of school, and looking, trying to get into this amazing industry that was rapidly growing. And I love that I was able to create like a stepping stone, right? From like customer service, and here's a growth pattern. You can go into inside sales, and then from there you can go into sales if you want to, and then maybe become the GM, So that was really nice. And I did see in those long 14 years a lot of positive changes, and met a lot of great companies, right? Namaste Solar was one of my accounts while I was at Kyocera, SunSense, Pioneers, like all of these companies that have been around for so long. Like that's where I met you, going to SPI and just seeing all of these changes and meeting people that are actually not just, business owners that are not just saying, oh yeah, we want to create a more inclusive workplace or, make a change in our industry, but that actually have the power to do so and are doing it, not just talking about it, right? Because when it's the popular thing to do, it's really easy to say, I support it and, I believe in this, but actually doing it and watching people do it has been just super incredible.
Yeah, that's the disconnect, unfortunately, is that it seems like, especially in the last year, a lot of folks are getting on this train, which is good. We need awareness and more people are talking about it. But yeah, that is my worry, is that some folks are just talking about it. It's a marketing thing,
Right.
or it's some kind of a hoop to jump through. But I would say that in the solar industry, more than others, that there's a lot of genuine folks that really want not just a sustainable planet, but also progress in culture, progress in social issues. Yeah, well, you've been through a lot. It's just stepping into that role and deciding that you're going to be a salesperson and grow in that direction. Sounds like having some mentors along the way that believed in you was a big part of that. What about your peers, your friends, your family, the folks that you grew up with? What did they think about your solar career? Did you talk about it much, and was it different from their paths, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my grandparents lived in Mexico like most of their life, right? And so my summers were spent in Mexico on a farm with no electricity or running water, right? Getting up in the morning, going to the well to fetch water. If you wanted to take a warm bath, you had to light up the wood stove, heat some up, and share it with your cousins, bathing over a tin, those types of things, and bringing in the lantern at night. And so that really helped me coming back, to my comfortable home in Phoenix, right? With flipping a light switch and having warm water when I needed it. That really taught me how to appreciate that. And so that was always something that I wanted to instill in my children, right? Like, don't take these things for granted, and how to conserve a lot of like our natural resources. Like that was important to me as a young child because my grandfather always talked to me about that. And so when I started talking to, my family members about, the company that I was working for and solar power and solar energy, I mean, it was very popular already for agriculture in Mexico, right? They had like solar powered water pumps. That's how they, for the cattle, that's how they got them, water and whatnot. So there was a growing interest in it. And so now, I have a handful of family members that are like, Ruby, I'm getting a solar system, or, what do you know about this module, this manufacturer? What can you tell us about electric vehicles, right? Because they kind of correlate all of it. So yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah, my husband was super, super supportive of it. And he was always, so, he kind of bragged about it. Like, yeah, my wife's in solar, and, everyone should pay more attention to, climate change and all of these things. So the support's always been there. But it's also super important to me because, like I said, having children, these are things that we need to make sure they're always at the forefront, right? And it doesn't just fizzle. And the more we talk about it, you never know who's listening, right? So it kind of could spark something, and then people could continue, what we're working on today.
Yeah, that's a great story about your grandparents, and going back to the farm and talking about true sustainability and resource consumption. There's a lot to unpack there. How would you respond to someone who would make a generalization or a stereotype that environmentalism or sustainability and climate are kind of like a white middle class, talking point, and that folks that are Black or brown or poor are not as worried about that? That it's, in some ways, it's a luxury to worry about that stuff if you're, worrying about where tomorrow's food is going to come from.
Well, I feel like, in certain neighborhoods, right? You drive around, my neighborhood included, like I see a lot of solar, and it is a luxury, right? Because in other communities, clean water is a luxury for them, and we take it for granted, right? And so here it's like, oh, you have solar. Wow, like that must have been expensive. And in other communities, it's like, oh, you have solar because you can't afford anything else, and someone donated a system to you. Or, you know what I mean? Like I just said, we had to go to the well to get clean water. They didn't have running water. And that sustainable living or conserving energy during the day, when they did get electricity in that small town, we were all about conserving it because we knew what it was like to be without, right? And when you don't know what it's like to be without, you do take those things for granted, and anything else. I mean, a lot of people can't afford a solar system.
Right. It's like back to Maslow's hierarchy, the things that we take for granted are luxuries for a lot of folks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Black and brown people. I had no idea that you were born in Mexico. I knew you're, of Latin descent, but I didn't know that you're actually. Is it a green card? Is that what they call it, or is it
I'm a permanent
U.S. resident?
Yeah. So I've been here in the U.S. in Phoenix since I was a baby. I was born in Mexico. My parents were both born in Mexico, so I have immigrant parents. Following the American dream. My dad came here to find a better life for his family, right? And so we struggled. We lived with relatives when we got here, and my parents were each working 2 jobs. And, English is my second language. I actually learned how to speak English through my older brother. He would come home and teach me what he learned at school, and he would teach my mother as well. So that's how my mom learned her English. So sometimes I still butcher certain things, certain words, because I grew up saying them wrong. It wasn't until I was like in my, 15, 16, like my teenage years that I was like, I've been saying that wrong this entire time.
We'll blame Big Brother. I'm getting
And my
chills.
mom.
I mean, the story you just told about your parents and the hard work that is the American dream. And there's nothing more American than, some immigrants, unless you're Native American, coming here to build a better life. Yet at the same time,
Yeah.
especially under the last 4 years, man, people have been throwing some hate your way or towards you people, to use a phrase from a
Well,
former
keep in
president.
mind, yeah, right. Yeah, no, keep in mind, I've been in Arizona my whole life. And Arizona is a state that made national news when in 2010 they passed this SB 1070, which gave police officers or anyone, the right to ask you for documentation, whether you're driving while brown, right? Or walking your dog or jogging. If they thought you looked illegal or undocumented, they had the right to ask you for documentation. And it didn't really hit me because, like you said, I had no idea. I knew you were of, Latino descent because of your last name or whatever. That was super common in high school. People, like, I wasn't Mexican enough for the Mexican folks, and I wasn't, white enough for the white folks, right? But they would hear me speak Spanish, and they'd be like, I've had someone say to me before, and it was actually in one of my classes. I remember in college already, even, I was speaking with my best friend in Spanish, and I had someone look over like super surprised. And they're like, Ruby, you speak Mexican? And I was like, yeah, I speak really good gringo too. They're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea, but it wasn't until 2010 when SB 1070 was passed here in Arizona that I really felt it. I mean, I had my daughter already at the time who is, brown and has, a Latino sounding last name. And it really started to kind of worry me. And that's when it really hit home, because I've always been able to defend myself and, kind of react to it in a way that I felt like would get through to the other person. But then thinking that this child would have to deal with something like that just because of her last name and the color of her skin. I mean, that's something that, people have been dealing with forever, but it was a little different for me. Right. But yeah, I think I told you the story. I got pulled over once and I had no idea why I was getting pulled over. And it wasn't until, it kind of marinated for a second. Like I was at a red light. I wasn't speeding, right? My tags weren't expired. And I was thinking, why did I just get pulled over? And this police officer, very nonchalantly was like having a conversation with me. And I noticed it, I got pulled over at a red light, went into a parking lot, and I was on my way to work. And I rolled down my window and he looks at me like, is this your car? Is this your vehicle, ma'am? Like, yes. You're Ruby? Yes. Can you tell me why you pulled me over? So, oh, where are you headed? Just making conversation. Didn't ask me for my driver's license, proof of insurance, none of the, standard things that they ask you for when they pull you over. And he's like, oh, where do you work? What do you do for a living? And that's when it hit me. He ran my license plate and my name, Ruby Cristina Quintana Ramirez, like right after SB 1070 had passed. Like, that's why he pulled me over, because I have a very Mexican sounding name, right? And I was infuriated. I was so angry because all I could think about was like how my daughter with darker complexion was going to have to potentially deal with this the rest of her life, especially in this state, right? So yeah, I think that another reason why this, Jedi work is so important to me and a lot of people is because, even if it's something that we haven't had to deal with directly, it impacts the people around us and people that we love and people that we worry we won't be, able to stick up for later, right? Or that they'll be in a situation and we're not there to defend them or help them get through it. And so that's why I love seeing a lot of, specifically white folks pay attention to it and try to be involved and try to actively make a difference, right? For our children and for those who can't defend themselves.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there are a lot of folks that are, have been active in this space for a long time. Yeah, I think a
Right.
lot of folks are starting to realize the difference between not being a racist and being an anti-racist, and how it's not just a passive thing; it's an active thing. But everyone's at a different spot in the journey. You're interacting with a lot of folks in the Amicus community. We've got 60 plus 63 member businesses, hundreds of different folks. And I think that you are one of the ringleaders of the Jedi calls that are, pulling in a lot of resources and getting some conversations going. That probably exposes you to hopefully some vulnerability of white folks or other folks that are, admitting that they're not sure what to do. They're not sure how to be an ally. They're not sure how to use their power and their voices to push change forwards. I mean, are those the conversations that folks are having?
Yeah, and it's really, it's fascinating sometimes to learn these things. Like, prior to the Black Lives Matter movement being more at the forefront, and when the media it exploded in the media, right? Like, because this has been an organization that's been around for a really long time, and it wasn't until like the recent, death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor where it really, really kind of took off, right? But even prior to that, right, I remember Amicus helping draft a letter and circulating that to different manufacturers, removing the word slave and master from their handbooks and their training manuals. Things like that, it really makes you think more about systemic racism and things that are kind of normal that we don't even think about, right? Like terms like, blacklisted or white papers, and like it makes you think more about why these certain like very normal common use terms, like where does it come from and why are we still using it, right? And so and it makes you look more like on your personal life as well as like in your professional, your career, everything that you do, how to be more sensitive to other people, how people identify, right? How, why is it always a policeman or a postman, right? Now it's like postal worker or police. What's the correct term now? Police person, police officer.
Cop, is that yeah, police officer is probably what they would say.
Right. But all of those things, right, that we never really thought about. Like, why do we use that term? Where does it come from? And what, there is something that we can do to change it. So what if it's super common? Maybe we make it not common, right? We change that. And so, yeah.
Cool. Well, again, maybe putting on your hat as both Kyocera and Amicus, just observing the solar world, all the different companies, all the different players, going to SPI and the other shows. What have you observed, and where are we at today? And let's say actually shift it. How about where do we need to be? What change is yet to be made that you would advocate for?
Yeah, I feel like we're just starting to make those changes, like going in the right direction, right? We have more women in solar now, and I love seeing like all of these networking events and more, a call for more diversity in the workplace. But I personally still experience certain individuals that still, they know I'm at Amicus, for example, in my job role, I'm the point person for certain things, and they still will kind of ignore my calls or emails and only want to talk to, the male that's in charge, right? Instead of me. And he'll push back and say, nope, Ruby's the one that you need to talk to. You need to sort these things out with Ruby, talk to Ruby. But I see that a lot, like, oh, is there a man I could talk to? Like that's unfortunately still out there, right? And so I think that it's great, like for people like you. I know in your organization you have some fantastic women there, and I think that it starts there, right? Like the job role that you're in, and other owners are in, is to empower the women in your organization, empower the people of color in your organization, give them the voice that they deserve, right? And make sure others know that they're the ones, to talk to, and they're the ones that can make those decisions. And actively looking for those people, right? So some people I've heard, on some of these calls, some people that say like, well, we've tried and we nothing's changed. And it's like, okay, well, have you tried any? Obviously what you were doing in the past was getting you the results that you have today. So have you changed the way that you recruit folks, right? Because it's great to have recommendations and people that we know and bringing those folks on. But if everyone in the room looks and sounds like you, that's all you're going to end up with, because that's usually who they're talking to and who they're associating with, right? So if you really want to change the way your room looks, go look in a different room.
And that could be the chapter of a book. If you want to change the way that your room looks, you're going to have to go to a different room. And to be fair, a lot of solar companies promote from within, right? We start with one person and then we hire, and that guy from the roof now becomes a technical site visit. And but if you're promoting from within, you're going to basically continue to be the same color, the same sex, and even the same class.
Right.
I do mention class because I think that just like there's different groups from ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, I would say that folks that grew up super poor are have a completely different life experience than a lot of middle class people and a lot of the mainstream business society.
Absolutely. And I, as a hiring manager at Kyocera, I kind of dealt with some of that too. For a really long time, I had other people saying, "No, we need a 4-year degree. We need people from the university in this job role." And I would say, "Why?" Like, I couldn't afford to go to a Ivy League or, go to the university even if I wanted to. A lot of people are in that same situation, and it doesn't mean that you're smarter than them just because you have a fancy degree, right? So a lot of these jobs don't even require that, right? To answer a phone, you don't need to have a 4-year degree. Plus, like, if that's the job you're going for, you wasted your time and your money. So just making a lot of those changes, which is, something so simple. Like, why do I have to ask for a diploma for someone to answer a phone? Like, I can train them. I can provide them all of the tools that they need to be successful. Why am I going to, discriminate against them because they couldn't afford a specific type of education?
Yeah, great
Right?
point. I think obviously there's engineers and stuff that you go to college, you learn a specific thing and you use it. But I'm a political science grad. I think that there's not too much going on in my day-to-day work life that I learned in school, but I did learn quite a bit. But largely, I think you're right that the college degree system is kind of like reinforces this classism that we've got as a large part of our society, just like institutional racism.
Yeah. I mean, my dad was, he worked for a really nice man who owned his own, HVAC company. And my dad made it his mission to work with him, learn from him, and buy out the company. And he did that. But had this guy not given him that opportunity, he mentored him and he paid for him to take some classes. And my dad, did that and bought the company and had a successful, residential and commercial HVAC company. But again, if he didn't have someone to give him that opportunity and look past that, he would have never been able to do that, to fulfill his dream, right?
Yeah, we kid ourselves when we kind of describe our economy as a meritocracy, right? Where if you're good at something, you'll be rewarded, and that sometimes happens. But I think the majority of the time, the economy is set up to kind of perpetuate the status quo, and it's not a meritocracy. Far from it. We've got a lot of
Right.
incredible talent, a lot of great people. The hardest working people are being shut out, and positions of power are being handed to folks just because of either where they're born and who they know, or what college degree they've got that their parents paid for. Well, what other things would we change if we were in
Right.
charge, Ruby? I'll give you the magic wand.
I love seeing, Solar States is one of our member companies that I always admire, like the things that they do, right? Like the programs that they have to help the youth, the troubled youth in their communities. Like this is where it starts. If you live in this community and you really care about it, like get to the root, try and figure out what the problem is and what you can do to be a part of the solution, right? So they have this incredible program where they train them, they give them a cell phone, transportation to help them get back on their feet or to get on the right track, right? Because it's very difficult. And if you have 10 things against you, like sometimes it's easier to go in that direction than this direction if you're going like, against the current, right? So when they're giving these young people the tools to be successful, everything that they need, I feel like we should have programs like that in every state, companies like that in every state, city. I know it's going to be, it's easier said than done, but I mean, I think that would be a wonderful place to start.
That's a great one. We actually had Micah as a podcast guest, Micah from Solar States, Micah Gold Markel, and he described that program that's doing a lot of not just technical training, but I guess you might call it life skills, or just the all around support and mentoring that folks need to succeed in the world that we live in. And some of these kids have been in prison. They're coming from really challenging backgrounds, and he shared a whole bunch of great success stories. And I agree with you. If we could replicate those training and empowerment models in all the communities, because I think something tells me that there's kids like that, young people like that in all the communities that have a choice between
everywhere,
taking one path or another, and we hopefully can support them to take a more sustainable, healthy, responsible path.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as children, we spend most of our time in school, right? You're 8 hours out of the day, you're at school and vulnerable to what they teach you and to what your surroundings are. That's your environment for a major part of your day. And then you're an adult and you spend a bulk of your time at work, right? And so if those two places could be empowering you or helping you, pushing you to be a better you, and helping the community and your environment improve as well, I mean, that's where the focus needs to be. That's why I love seeing these changes in the workplace, right? Because I think about, okay, my children spend most of their time at school right now, and then when they go to work, I want them to feel like it's a safe space. I want them to be seen as individuals, like as just, not the color of their skin, not what they identify as, not, who their parents are, for them and their capabilities, and how can we all just be a better version of ourselves, right? Without any of the other things being a factor.
Oh, that's beautifully said. And I could change the tagline of the podcast. Really, what we're talking about is building the world that we want our children to live in, and it's a lot more than just solar. It's a holistic change that we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like this. I love that we're part of this Jedi group in the Amicus group and beyond that, right? Because it's not just in the workplace. Like this is a part of our everyday lives and building a better future, a safer environment for the future generation. Like as a mother, I'm always thinking about my children, right? And when I'm not here, what are we leaving behind for them? Not just like a clean, or hopefully, right, a planet that they could still live on. But the workplace, the school, everything, it's all of it.
Yeah. Good stuff. We could go on and on for hours talking about this. And hopefully we'll connect at New Orleans at SPI and continue this conversation. But it's time to wrap things up here on the podcast. But the good news is we get to go into the Solar for All Better Together section, where you get to share some things with our listeners. The first section is the Note and Promote, where you get to suggest a book or author, something that you've been reading that might be useful to our listeners.
Yeah, two great books that I've already read, How to Be an Anti-Racist and So You Want to Talk About Race. I think like those have been in the forefront for a while now, but I'm currently reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and that is an amazing read. Just, showing different perspectives, and a lot of those things kind of resonate with things that we see here, right? That we kind of have learned about, in other countries, but it's actually happening here in ours as well. So that has me, I find myself having a lot of aha moments with that one. So that's a recommendation for sure.
Yeah, I've heard it's heavy. Is it somewhat depressing?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the truth can be hard.
Yeah, exactly. The truth hurts, right? And so sweeping it under the rug isn't going to help. So we have to talk about these things that are painful.
Uh, Absolutely. Thanks. And we'll put that on the list. And then the other piece is where you get to share some advice or wisdom that might be useful to folks. Have you any nuggets to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I would just say when others don't believe in you, always believe in yourself, right? And being a good human, there's nothing more important than just being the best version of yourself that you could be. Just be kind to others and to yourself. Know that you're worthy and know that you could do anything that you put your mind to. Whether, this is a huge change that we're trying to make in the world, but if you could just be a little speckle or a little part of it, that could spark something greater. So believe in yourself and do what's right. Do what you feel is right.
If everyone was doing that, we would not have this podcast, but we're moving in that direction. Um, well, in the face of all the challenges out there, I know that music helps me make sense of it all, or at least get by one more day. And we're building the Better Together playlist, where our guests get to contribute 2 songs. Do you have some songs for us? Maybe one that's a good old standby, and then something that you've bumped into that's somewhat new in your streams.
Yeah. So one artist that has passed, so Tupac Shakur, I think, is one of the greatest like rappers and artists of all time. A poet. He was an actor. Also spoke a lot to his community, the Black community, and he has a song called "Changes" that I really love. And a lot of times, he was kind of what he was rapping about or talking about was taken out of context a little bit. But if you see any of his interviews, really it was a positive message to Black, young men and women of like, hey, we've got to change the way that we are, change the way that we treat each other so that people could change their perception of us. So I think he's a great rapper, and that's one of my favorite songs, "Changes." And then a feel good song, right? So that's not something that I could really bump to with my children in the car, but a song that the Black Eyed Peas released years ago, "Where Is the Love?" I thought that had a very great message, like everyone could kind of relate to. It's talking about things that are going on in the world, and where we really could just learn to love one another, right? Regardless of all of the other things that we've talked about. So I think that that's a really good, wholesome one. The Black Eyed Peas, "Where Is the Love?"
Good stuff. Yeah, talk about a melting pot band. I think they've got Philippines, Native American, Asian, Latino, African American. Uh, I think they got a little bit of everything there, and that's why probably they're so successful. Good stuff. Well, Ruby, it's been a pleasure chatting with you and touching on some of these subjects and having you share your perspective and thoughts with our listeners. So thank you so much for being a guest and also just for all the work you're doing to push change forwards. Um, I think it's important work. No one's paying you for this. You're doing this just because it's the right thing to do, and you're following your heart, and it's a beautiful thing. So thanks for being a guest and contributing to it and being part of the Solar for All community. And thanks to our sponsor, Third Sun Solar, and thanks mostly to our listeners. We are trying to build a movement, and so please share this podcast with your friends. Send folks our way. You can find the show notes and other great resources at solarforall.show. You can stream the podcast on all the streaming services and spread the word. Join us. This is how we're going to be not just saving the planet and making a planet habitable for our children and their children, but also making it the kind of a planet we want to be on, that's filled with love and respect and humanity. And not just trying to change the energy transition, but also the social and cultural transition that is happening side by side with the energy transition. So thanks again for being a guest and for being part of the movement, Ruby.